Have you ever experienced that haunting moment when you're surrounded by people yet feel utterly alone? When words get trapped in your throat just as you're about to express something important? Or when a part of you feels frozen in time, carrying wounds that seem impossible to heal? What you're experiencing isn't weakness or failure. It's the voice of your silent inner child, desperately trying to communicate through the only language it knows: emotional pain, withdrawal, and protective silence. Today we're embarking on a profound journey through Carl Jung's revolutionary understanding of the psyche, exploring how childhood experiences create internal splits that continue to shape our adult lives. We'll uncover why traditional healing approaches often fall short when dealing with deep emotional wounds, discover Jung's 6 transformative stages of psychological integration, and most importantly, learn practical methods to finally give voice to the parts of yourself that have been silenced for far too long. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why certain emotions feel overwhelming, why some relationships trigger inexplicable responses, and why healing requires more than just positive thinking or willpower. This isn't just another self-help approach. This is a scientifically grounded, time-tested pathway to reclaiming the authentic self that was forced into hiding during your most vulnerable years. If you've ever felt like you're living behind a mask, if you struggle with chronic feelings of emptiness despite external success, or if you sense there's a part of you that's been waiting your entire life to finally be heard and understood, then this message has been crafted specifically for you. What we're about to discover could be the key that unlocks the door to genuine self-acceptance and lasting emotional freedom. The phenomenon of the silent inner child begins with understanding a fundamental truth that Carl Jung discovered through decades of clinical work. Within every adult psyche lives aspects of the child we once were, carrying not just memories, but active emotional patterns that continue to influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways we rarely recognize. Jung's concept of psychological complexes reveals that when children experience emotional neglect, trauma, or consistent invalidation, they don't simply get over it as they mature. Instead, these experiences become what Jung called autonomous complexes, self-contained psychological entities that operate independently of conscious awareness, creating internal conflicts and repetitive patterns that can persist throughout adult life. Modern neuroscience has validated Jung's intuitive understanding in remarkable ways. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research on trauma demonstrates that difficult childhood experiences literally reshape brain architecture, particularly in areas responsible for emotional regulation, self-awareness, and interpersonal connection. When children consistently experience emotional invalidation or neglect, their developing nervous systems adapt by creating protective mechanisms that can become maladaptive in adult relationships. But Jung's insight went deeper than recognizing the problem. He understood that the solution lies not in eliminating these wounded aspects of self, but in developing conscious relationship with them. The silent inner child isn't a burden to be overcome. It's a part of your psyche that holds both your deepest wounds and your most authentic essence, waiting for the right conditions to emerge from hiding. The silence that characterizes this inner child didn't develop in a vacuum. It emerged as an intelligent response to environments where authentic expression felt dangerous, where emotional needs were met with criticism or withdrawal, where the child learned that certain aspects of themselves were unacceptable or unwelcome. This adaptive silence served a crucial protective function, but like all psychological defenses, what once protected can eventually become a prison. Jung understood that healing requires what he called making the unconscious conscious, bringing these hidden aspects of self into conscious awareness where they can be integrated rather than rejected. This process, known as individuation, represents the journey towards psychological wholeness that Jung considered the central task of human development. The first stage of Jung's transformative process involves what we might call recognition, the dawning awareness that something essential about yourself has been hidden or suppressed. This recognition often begins with a growing sense of disconnection, a feeling that your outer life doesn't match your inner experience, or persistent emotions that seem disproportionate to current circumstances. Many people reach this stage during what Jung termed a midlife crisis, though it can occur at any age when life circumstances create enough pressure to crack the persona, the mask we wear to meet social expectations. Suddenly, the roles you've played, the identity you've constructed, and the ways you've learned to navigate relationships begin to feel hollow or exhausting. This recognition phase can be deeply unsettling because it challenges everything you thought you knew about yourself. You might find yourself questioning long-held beliefs, feeling restless in relationships that once felt secure, or experiencing unexpected emotional reactions that seem to come from nowhere. Jung understood that this discomfort is actually a sign of psychological health, evidence that your authentic self is trying to emerge from beneath layers of adaptive functioning. Dr. Carl Jung's extensive study of dreams revealed that during this recognition phase, people often experience dreams featuring children, abandoned houses, forgotten rooms, or scenarios where they're searching for something or someone they've lost. These dream images represent the psyche's attempt to communicate about neglected aspects of self that are ready to be reclaimed. The second stage involves what Jung called shadow work, the courageous process of turning toward the aspects of yourself you've learned to reject, deny, or hide. The shadow contains not only negative traits we'd rather not acknowledge, but also positive qualities that were suppressed because they weren't safe to express in our family or cultural environment. For many people, the silent inner child lives within the shadow, carrying emotions, needs, and responses that were once deemed unacceptable. Perhaps your family valued stoicism over emotional expression, achievement over authenticity, or harmony over honest conflict. Whatever aspects of your natural temperament didn't fit these expectations became part of your personal shadow. Shadow work requires developing what Jung called moral imagination, the capacity to hold compassion for parts of yourself you've been conditioned to judge. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or abandoning healthy boundaries, but rather acknowledging that all aspects of your personality exist for reasons and deserve understanding rather than condemnation. Research by Dr. Kristin Neff on self-compassion demonstrates that this shift from self-criticism to self-acceptance literally changes brain structure, reducing activity in areas associated with rumination and self-attack, while increasing activity in regions linked to emotional regulation and resilience. When you can extend genuine compassion to your wounded inner child, you create the internal safety necessary for healing to occur. The third stage involves what Jung termed active imagination, consciously engaging with the images, feelings, and insights that emerge from the unconscious mind. This isn't passive fantasy, but deliberate dialogue with aspects of your psyche that have been excluded from conscious awareness. Active imagination with your inner child might involve visualizing yourself at different ages, remembering specific moments when you felt unseen or unheard, or simply sitting quietly and asking, "What do you need me to know?" The responses might come as images, emotions, physical sensations, or unexpected insights that provide new understanding about long-standing patterns or difficulties. Jung discovered that this process requires what he called holding the tension of opposites, maintaining awareness of both your adult capabilities and your childlike vulnerabilities without trying to eliminate either. You're not trying to fix or change your inner child, but rather to establish relationship, to offer the presence and understanding that may have been missing during your actual childhood. Modern trauma therapy has validated Jung's approach through techniques like internal family systems, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, which similarly involves developing conscious relationship with different parts of the psyche. Research shows that this internal dialogue can be as healing as external therapy relationships when practiced with consistency and genuine care. The fourth stage represents what Jung called integration, the gradual process of bringing together aspects of yourself that have been split apart by early experiences. Integration doesn't mean eliminating your inner child or forcing it to grow up, but rather creating internal harmony, where different aspects of your personality can coexist and support each other. This stage often involves grieving, mourning what you didn't receive during childhood, while simultaneously celebrating what you're able to give yourself now. You might find yourself feeling sadness for opportunities lost, anger at those who failed to provide what you needed, and surprisingly, gratitude for your own resilience and capacity to heal. Integration work frequently brings up questions about forgiveness, but Jung's approach differs from conventional understandings. Rather than pressuring yourself to forgive those who harmed you, Jungian integration focuses on releasing the psychological charge around past events so they no longer control your present experience. This kind of forgiveness emerges naturally as healing progresses, not as a requirement for healing to begin. The fifth stage involves what Jung called the development of conscious personality, learning to live authentically from your integrated self rather than from defensive patterns or people-pleasing strategies. This means making choices based on your genuine values and needs, rather than fear of rejection or need for approval. During this stage, you might notice significant changes in your relationships, career choices, creative expression, or life priorities. What once felt necessary for survival, certain jobs, relationships, or lifestyle patterns, may no longer align with who you're becoming. This can be challenging because it often involves disappointing others or stepping away from familiar sources of identity. Jung understood that this stage requires tremendous courage because it involves living authentically even when others don't understand or approve of your choices. You're no longer willing to betray your inner child by silencing your authentic voice or suppressing your genuine needs for the comfort of others. Research by Dr. Brené Brown on authentic living confirms that people who develop the courage to be vulnerable and authentic report higher levels of life satisfaction, stronger relationships, and greater resilience in facing life's challenges. When you stop abandoning your inner child for external approval, you develop what Brown calls shame resilience, the capacity to experience difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The sixth and final stage represents what Jung called self-realization or individuation, the ongoing process of becoming who you truly are beyond the masks, roles, and defensive patterns that once defined you. This isn't a destination, but a way of living that honors both your wounded humanity and your essential wholeness. In this stage, your relationship with your inner child becomes a source of strength rather than vulnerability. You've learned to provide internal safety, validation, and care, which means you can engage with others from fullness rather than neediness. Your sensitivity becomes a gift rather than a burden. Your emotional depth becomes wisdom rather than overwhelming intensity. Jung believed that individuals who successfully complete this process of individuation don't just heal themselves, they become healing presences for others. Having learned to hold space for their own wounded inner child, they naturally develop the capacity to offer that same quality of presence to others who are struggling. Modern research on post-traumatic growth supports Jung's understanding that people who engage deeply with their psychological wounds often develop greater empathy, stronger relationships, increased appreciation for life, and a more profound sense of meaning than they might have experienced without going through the healing process. The practical application of Jung's 6 stages begins with developing what therapists call dual awareness, the capacity to be present with your adult self while simultaneously holding space for your inner child's experience. This might involve setting aside time each day for internal dialogue, asking yourself questions like, "What am I feeling right now?" Or, "What does the younger part of me need?" Creating physical safety is crucial for this work because your nervous system needs to feel secure before vulnerable aspects of self can emerge. This might involve establishing regular sleep schedules, eating nourishing foods, creating peaceful environments at home, or removing yourself from relationships or situations that consistently trigger your defensive patterns. Jung's method of journaling, which he called his Red Book work, provides a powerful tool for accessing unconscious contents. Try writing from the perspective of your inner child, allowing whatever wants to emerge to flow onto the page without censoring or editing. You might be surprised by the insights, memories, or emotional expressions that appear when you give your inner child permission to speak freely. Dream work becomes particularly important in this process because dreams often contain messages from aspects of self that aren't yet integrated. Keep a journal by your bedside and record whatever you remember upon waking, looking for recurring themes, images of children or childhood settings, or scenarios that evoke strong emotional responses. Body awareness practices support this work because trauma and emotional suppression are held in the body, not just the mind. Regular movement, breathing exercises, yoga, or other somatic practices can help release held tension and create more space for authentic expression. The relationship between creativity and inner child healing cannot be overstated. Jung himself was a painter, sculptor, and stone carver who used artistic expression as a pathway to psychological integration. When you engage in creative activities without focusing on outcome or performance, you often access parts of yourself that have been silenced by overfunctioning or perfectionism. Setting boundaries becomes essential as you progress through these stages, because healing requires protecting the tender aspects of self that are emerging. This might mean saying no to commitments that drain you, limiting time with people who consistently invalidate your experience, or creating physical and emotional space for your inner work. The role of community in this healing process is crucial, though Jung emphasized that it must be the right kind of community. Seek relationships with people who can hold space for emotional authenticity, who don't need you to be healed or positive all the time, and who understand that growth often involves periods of vulnerability and uncertainty. Professional support through Jung-trained therapists, support groups, or other healing practitioners can accelerate this process significantly. Having someone who understands the terrain of inner child work can provide guidance, validation, and safety as you navigate unfamiliar emotional territory. As we reach the culmination of this exploration, it's important to understand that healing your silent inner child isn't about eliminating pain or achieving perfect mental health. It's about developing the capacity to hold your full human experience with compassion, to respond to life's challenges from wisdom rather than wound, and to offer others the gift of your authentic presence. The silent inner child within you has been waiting not for perfection but for permission to exist, to feel, to need, to be imperfect and still worthy of love. When you finally offer this permission to yourself, something profound shifts not just in your internal world, but in how you show up in relationships, work, creativity, and all aspects of life. Jung's 6 stages aren't meant to be completed once and forgotten, but rather practiced as an ongoing way of relating to yourself with curiosity and care. There will be times when old patterns resurface, when your inner child feels threatened again, or when life circumstances trigger defensive responses you thought you'd outgrown. This isn't regression, it's being human. What changes through this work is not the elimination of all difficulties, but the development of what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox, to remain present with discomfort, and to choose conscious responses rather than unconscious reactions. You learn to be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both wise and wonder-filled. The journey of healing your silent inner child ultimately leads to what Jung considered the highest human achievement, the capacity to love, not just others but yourself, including the wounded, imperfect, struggling aspects that you've spent so much energy trying to hide or fix. This love isn't sentimental or naive. It's informed by deep understanding of human complexity and seasoned by the courage to remain present with difficulty. When you've learned to speak with your silent inner child, to heal the wounds that created the silence, and to transform your relationship with your own vulnerability, you become what the world desperately needs. Someone who can hold space for others' pain without trying to fix it. Someone who can offer authentic presence without agenda. Someone who has learned that true strength includes, rather than excludes, tenderness. Your silent inner child was never meant to remain silent forever. They were waiting for you to develop the capacity to hear them, to understand their language of emotion and sensation, and to offer them what they always deserved: unconditional presence, infinite patience, and the promise that they will never again be abandoned or forgotten. The voice of your inner child, once reclaimed, becomes not just a source of healing for yourself, but a gift to everyone whose life you touch. Having learned to listen to your own silence, you develop the rare capacity to hear what others cannot yet express. Having healed your own splitting, you become someone who can hold space for others' fragmentation until they find their way back to wholeness. This is Jung's ultimate vision of individuation, not the creation of perfect people, but the development of whole people who can embrace their full humanity and invite others to do the same. Your healing journey becomes a light for others who are still finding their way out of silence and into the fullness of authentic self-expression.